right, Ted and Mark, welcome to the Grin Gets Real podcast. I am a total fangirl because I devoured your book. So needless to say, I'm excited to have you both on here.
Thanks for having us.
Grateful to be here. Fan of what you do and excited to be on the podcast.
Excellent. So let's start with the easy question. Give our listeners a high-level view of who you guys are, just kind of what your area of expertise is.
My background, Ted, I have been in nonprofit leadership most of my career. Started in the arts, moved into greater kind of oversight and leadership at an executive level of the arts. Have always been a kind of strategic, big picture, high level thinker. The minute things get into the weeds, I don't do good work. Mark and I met about 11 years ago and decided to kind of bootstrap Historic Agency to really, in the beginning, just serve a lot of clients I was working with, but that needed things beyond my depth and ability. And then 11 years later, we're here.
A match made in heaven.
Yeah. I similar to Ted, a nonprofit background and some tech. But my kind of specialty was turnaround. So I'd come in and do a turnaround for organization, restructure marketing teams, fundraising teams, communication teams, and did that and thought maybe I should go out on my own and offer what I have for other organizations to kind of scale the impact I was making. So we're both really passionate about purpose-driven social impact causes. And I remember the first time meeting Ted. I don't know if I told you this, Ted. I was like, man, who is this jerk? Like, who is this guy that thinks he could just
all solid friendships are built on that kind of premise, right?
Sure. And then when you realize, wait, I'm also a jerk. This is going to be great.
It's pretty funny. I think both of us are truth tellers, but in our own unique way based on our hard wiring. So, it's helped navigate lots of our own internal agency changes quite well.
Yeah.
But I also think we both bring a real passion for the organizational health side. I think we've both been burned by nonprofits, especially that you would think a missional nonprofit that is driven and passionate would just be healthy. I don't know, by nature of the mission. I think we make that assumption a lot. And what we end up finding out is often nonprofits are the least organizationally healthy place because they have people who are just bleeding for a cause, which creates all sorts of drama and sideways energy. So I think we've both kind of approached this work of brand and strategy and culture with a lot of just personal history of being in places that didn't do any of those well.
Yeah, which I think is a really great segue into just, and I would imagine part of that reason for, your book. And I'm going to try again, like I had mentioned this before, well, not on the podcast, but I'd mentioned not making this a book club, but I truly devoured it because you talked about in this idea of internal culture, really just building your brand. And I'd love to get a better understanding of just what exactly does that mean? Is it unlimited PTO? Is it like, flexible schedules? What do we mean when we're talking about internal culture? Because I think there's a lot of assumptions of what that means for people.
I'll start, Mark. You can fill in the gaps I miss.
Yeah.
We have a philosophy of brand that starts with culture. So obviously brand includes identity and your experience, both digital and physical. It's your story, it's your product and service, but it's also, most importantly, your culture, the leaders, the founding passion, the convictions, the values. Those things are critical to brand strategy. So from day one, we've been about culture. Employee branding, right, where you begin to distill that culture into a value prop that's as important for the employee as it is for your customers, is a really important part of our work as well right now. But I think often what we find is the phone rings first for identity and experience in digital, and where we end up always almost backing into is culture, because it's the thing that is so obvious and yet so overlooked or rushed past in brand strategy work.
Yeah, culture, I think a good way to think about it, it's the culture, or it's the soil that everything grows out of. right? Or
Yeah.
it's the water, if you use the fish metaphor, right? Like, a fish doesn't really know it's in water until you take it out of water. And that's kind
Yeah.
of been our personal experience, is like, you don't realize how bad a culture is until you leave it. And so we realized that when your customers interact with your brand, if it's disconnected from your values, how you operationalize those values in your culture, what are the unspoken rules, um, the current buyer today, right? Millennials, Gen Z are
Hmm.
really adapt to understanding, like seeing the bullshit, if you will,
Yeah. Yeah.
of who you say you are and who you actually are, and it causes all kinds of sideways energy, and you end up spending more money on marketing and branding or PR or whatever it is. And so we really want to say, okay, if everything comes out of culture, right? If it's like soil, everything grows out of that. How is it aligned to the brand that you want to build, or what you want your customers to think and appreciate about what your product or service is? And so we spend a lot of time ourselves having to wrestle with what does that mean in our own agency,
Yeah.
and that's kind of where we got to the book Culture Built My Brand.
And the book was really written to demystify something that has often lived in this kind of ethereal, abstract realm. Like the word
Hmm.
culture is so big and so broad. And even if
Hmm.
you narrow it down to company culture or organizational culture, it's still confusing. Is that a single lever? Is it an outcome? Is it what is it exactly? So we try and help people understand what it is, and then talk about the levers and the parts that can contribute to changing it, which is essentially, I think, just demystifying it and giving people handles into how to proactively increase the health of their soil.
Yeah, you guys do a really great job of breaking it down in the book. For sure. It's very easy to be like, "Oh, there's lore." I
Mhm.
gravitated towards that as well too, because I'm like, "How do we get to that?" I won't dive into that part because I really wanted to at some point, but what I kind of want to go back to is, Mark, you mentioned this word values, and I love that you said that in regards to culture, because I know I get asked that a lot working at Grin, having been a customer at Grin and now decided this is the company. Like, I pursued Grin. I'm like, no, this is where I'm going to be. This is my retirement plan. You guys are stuck with me. Surprise. When people ask me about Grin, I talk about the values because that is something that always goes back. But I'd be interested to hear your guys' perspective on, how do you live out those values? What does that actually mean? How do you make them more than just inspirational posters on a wall or things that you post on your website?
Yeah, I think the first thing is realize values aren't the end all be all that we think as senior leaders or executive leaders.
Yeah.
Um, I think McKinsey, and we have this in the book, I think it's 37% or 27% of employees don't know how to apply the company values to their
Yeah.
everyday work. And so the the issue is, how do you actually operationalize those values? And we call those principles, right? The behaviors that
Hmm.
are expected of employees. And if you're old enough, like I am, to remember Enron, one of their integrity was a huge value for Enron, and they were a financial services energy company. I think that most of their senior executives went to jail for embezzlement and fraud, and
Hmm.
things that were the opposite of integrity. So how do we actually take values and turn them into something that our employees can actually talk about and know how they apply to
Yeah.
their jobs? And so we call those principles, and shape. Okay, take a value if you already have one, and write it in a way that an employee knows what that means. And so one of the clients that we were working with, their senior leadership had a value of servant leadership was the value.
Hmm.
So no one knew what that meant, and so they kind of flushed it out as, if you are the highest ranking employee traveling with a group of people on a plane and you get upgraded to first class, you give your first class seat to the lowest ranking employee or the newest member of the team, or whatever. And that was a way to describe, okay, that's what servant leadership looks like. If you have to share a hotel room, there's only one bed, you sleep on the floor, that kind of thing. That's what servant leadership looks like. And so we strive for that, is how do we take our values and turn them into principles or behaviors that allow employees then to actually start living that out.
We often find our clients have values, and those values are
Hmm.
important. They play an important role in the organization, but they're dangerously vague, or
Yeah.
abstract. So they're important, but if you ask 5 people what the value of authenticity or
Mhm.
fill in the blank, 3-word statement, 2-word statement, 1-word sentence, doesn't matter. They're usually vague, and you ask 5 people what that thing means, and that answer is 5 different things. So
Yeah.
what we think, some organizations are ready to scrap values and just start from the dust up, and they'll just take a single approach, which is much more specific, narrow, actionable values. Some people keep their values and then do principles, but the issue is creating something that people can't hide from. And often values are so abstract and broad, they allow people to kind of hide.
Yeah, that completely makes sense, and I can see how the values, once they're I'm gonna say personified, because that's probably the best way
Mhm,
that I can articulate
mhm.
it, right? Is personifying these
Yeah.
values so that they actually have the same meaning across the board, or an easier way to just kind of break them down and apply them to yourself as an employee does build up that internal culture. And I think that when you have that strong internal culture, you create these brand ambassadors like within your own four
Right. Yeah.
walls, which I think is so key, especially from a marketing strategy. I know that, like, Grin, we're talking about creator management. It's seeking out creators to bring in there. But I think like everybody has brand
Yeah.
ambassadors like at their
Yeah.
fingertips, right?
If your staff aren't your first line of influencers, it's going to be really, really hard to go hire an influencer and creative to help, promote your brand, because you haven't unpacked it enough where it can be
Yeah.
materialized or personified or whatever language you want to call it. And so values really should be clear enough that they know, as an employee, I know how to what marketing campaigns I should or shouldn't do because of the values that we have as an
Yeah.
organization. I know what I should be spending my time on. If I'm a product manager, I know what product I should be building, what features I should or should not include. And so that's why we spend a lot of time on that in the book.
Do you think that that internal culture and that brand ambassadorship is that only connection into an entire marketing strategy, um, from culture, or are there other added values to a marketing strategy when you have a strong internal culture? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think when you have a strong internal culture, or what we would say is not just strong, but it's aligned to the brand, right? So
Hmm.
Exactly. That's
the
what strength means is
right.
a brand aligned.
So
Okay.
as an employee, I'm experiencing the brand that we want our customers to experience. Um, it makes it really easy for the employee to improve a marketing campaign or make decisions around it, because they know they're actually experiencing the brand. Like when you talk about Grin, working at Grin, you're experiencing the brand that you want your customers to experience, and so it's really
Yes.
easy for you to translate that into your work, because you know what you're actually talking about. Where it goes sideways is, for most companies, the culture is not that strong, or it's not healthy, or it's not aligned to the brand, and
Right.
it's a lot of effort for the employee. So productivity goes down. Attention and task switching becomes a greater deal, because they're not actually living out the brand. They don't understand what it is, and so they have to go and figure it out each time.
What can I do as a brand to help to help to
Yeah.
help my employees, I hate this term, but I'm going to use it anyways, to drink the Kool-Aid, right?
Yeah.
Like to really be
Right.
infused with the brand and get that. I mean, we already mentioned values, but like what else could a brand potentially do to really build that
Yeah.
internally?
I think that in the book we talk about two, I think, key areas. One we call architecture, which is just the systems and process inside the company. Every company has to have them. The reality is, if you ever had to fill out an expense report at a big company,
Yeah.
it's not always the easiest, and it's not
Yes.
a reflection of the customer experience that you want to have. And so, if every touch point an employee has with your organization is more difficult than what you want your actual customers to experience, it's going to be harder for them, right? And so that's the
Yeah.
one area of, like, evaluate all that stuff and say, is it actually on brand? Does it match our values as an organization, the way we do expense reports, or the way we have our internet, or the way we do communication internally? If you're really about work-life balance and your CEO is sending emails at 11 p.m. at night,
Yeah.
he's telegraphing the opposite, right? Or she's telegraphing the opposite. And the other area is rituals, which is actually creating those moments and those experiences and those things that your team gets to do together, that personify your brand, and
Yeah.
that live out those values internally. And a lot of people do happy hours as an example of that. But what is something really specific that people realize that activity points back to an organizational value or to an aspect of your brand? Ted, I don't know, you want to talk about more about rituals?
Well, I think, excuse me, overarching all of this is a common misunderstanding, which we hear a lot from senior leaders. They'll hear you talk about culture and immediately
Hmm.
go, "Oh, well, our culture is fine. It's good. It's
Yeah.
healthy." Right. And what we're talking about in the book, health is kind of the minimum standard.
Hmm.
We're talking about health in a way that would suggest your culture is actually positioned to drive success.
Hmm.
It's one thing to have a healthy culture. We're not toxic. We're not assholes. We're not. It's another thing to have a culture that's actually positioned where your people truly are the brand ambassadors. They're equipped to be that. We're hiring them to not only perform effectively, but love the mission and the organization that they're a part of. And then as a result, we get this incredible momentum. So I think there's a lot of fine brushstrokes around how you position culture to your advantage versus just getting it healthy. If your issue is a toxic culture,
Yeah.
then there are big issues to address before you start getting into the fine details of positioning. But if you get healthy and aligned, brand alignment with your culture will sustain health. It will prevent you from ever drifting into any type of toxicity.
Do you think that there is any brand or business that doesn't benefit from a healthy internal culture? Yeah, that's my question. I mean, like, I would imagine it's everybody, but I would also imagine that there are some listeners that are like, maybe I don't really need to worry about that because I'm selling this widget, right?
Yeah,
It's
I
not
mean, it's
life
more
changing.
about,
Does that make sense?
yeah, health can, again, I think brand aligned is more important than health, frankly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so you can look at whether it's um, Bridgewater or BlackRock or Netflix that have really high demanding cultures, um, and performance is a thing. Netflix doesn't say they're a family; they say they're a professional sports team. And if we find someone who's
Yeah,
better at your job, we're going to replace you. Um,
it's tough.
some yeah, some people would say, well, that doesn't feel healthy. That doesn't feel like psychological safety
Yeah,
in my workplace. But it's on brand for them because they have to stay innovative. As all the studios have turned in and created their own streaming platforms. They
that's
have to
true.
compete, and so it makes sense for them. It's on brand. Is it healthy? That's questionable, right? So
Hmm.
that's kind of where the book goes. It's less about health and more about, is it on brand so that your employees can experience the brand and make better decisions for your brand, um, and then attract more customers.
Excellent. Now, how is culture built your brand?
Well,
Well,
you
we've
want to talk
been
about
through.
why we wrote the book, Ted?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was saying earlier, we wrote the book for a few reasons. One, we had common convictions that informed our work from day one, but we had never really figured out how to officially or consistently articulate it.
Yeah.
We had all of these experiences of seeing amazing clients do incredible work, and it would, in the 11th hour or sometimes earlier, fall apart. Why? Because of cultural barriers. And we could see those cultural barriers being hit and mitigating success, but because we weren't allowed to speak to those things, it felt like we were
Yeah.
swerving outside of our agency lane. We
Yeah.
just kind of had to watch failure take place in slow motion, and it was incredibly painful. So then we went through our own experience culturally, both
Yeah.
during COVID and through COVID, where we realized we have to make some hard shifts, and we don't necessarily have people on our team who are able to make those shifts, much less wanting to make those shifts. So how do we
Yeah.
do that? And it's the classic life cycle of an organization going from infancy to adolescence, to like there are shifts in leadership, shifts in organizational structure, shifts in thinking that have to take place that are painful, and they become tests of your own culture. So the combination of those three things, I think, almost required us to write a book. We have to articulate this, we have to figure out how to position it, and also provide it as a service to our clients because they
Yeah.
need it. And we had our own blood in which, in the inkwell, so we could write the book with our own
Yeah.
lived experience. And I think it's been really, really helpful for us as much as for our clients.
Yeah, it's like you guys have developed your own methodology to live and breathe by, right? Like that is your
Yeah.
culture, is really what's in the book. And I can't say enough positive things about that as well, too. Now, how has that affected either the marketing strategies that you develop for those who come to you, or maybe it even affects who you say yes to or who you bring on as a client?
Yeah, I think we're definitely want to work with people who value culture, company culture,
Yeah.
and see that as an important play. So that definitely influences. I think as it relates to historic, it has been a painful learning experience for us to eat our own medicine, right?
Yeah.
I think Ted, you were just in another interview yesterday talking about uh, how to cut people. What was can you go back to that? You were talking about
Well,
the culture, not being afraid.
I think a lot of times leaders talk about culture busters, but they avoid the culture busters who are people, and especially it's even easier
Mm,
to avoid or more difficult to name when your culture busters are performers in some capacities. So
yeah.
you may have a digital marketing rock star who is a
Yeah.
genius at digital marketing, but in every single Zoom or physical meeting, they're a complete culture buster.
Hmm.
My argument, having seen this play out multiple times, whatever value they bring in their skill is completely overshadowed by the culture buster in the big picture, in the macro. Now, if you're a boutique business and it's you and one other person, you can live with it. But if you have any number of people who are impacted by this person's bad behavior, the net is a loss over time. And I think sometimes we get enamored with people's brilliance or their skill, and we miss the broader impact they're having on, the culture, which is that soil or that tide that
Yeah.
lifts or lowers everything.
Yeah, it's the cancerous people, right? It's the cancerous people that are keeping everybody below their potential. That's always the way that I view it. Like
Mm-hmm.
you may have this one rock star, but you could also have seven rock stars that you are completely unaware of because of
Totally.
this
Right.
one
Yeah.
cancerous, toxic, like individual that is, it's those back alley conversations that they're
Yeah.
the
And
negative
sometimes
Well,
those people are your best friends, right? Or your really
or
good friends, or
family
the long
members.
time
Yeah.
family members, or
Oh,
long
that's
time.
tough.
Yeah,
Like in
that's
a
what,
small agency like us, our big shift was having to realize, okay, we've had some long term staff people that we care deeply for, but they don't fit anymore. And so, how do we have that conversation? How do we do it in an honoring way and even in those moments are culture building moments. How we handle those moments communicates to the existing staff, and communicates to the person that we have to transition off the team. And so
Yeah.
that's important. And that's probably the biggest lesson, is to not be afraid to be ruthless about protecting the culture that you're striving for.
and I think that this goes into a very, very practical key takeaway, and I think this might be an important time to say it.
Mhm.
Most organizations have really good rhetoric about development. They all see themselves as a developing organization, as an organization that wants to pour into their team members. And the more that they hear from Simon Sinek or others, they elevate the rhetoric, but they don't elevate the reality of that development.
Yeah.
And I will say, and I wish the book addressed this in more detail. I think book number 2 will. If you truly are a developing culture, a culture that proactively takes an interest in growing your people, you
Yeah.
see that in supervisory relationships, supervision, management, oversight. That is the front lines of development. And if you're truly developing people, It should be a core part of that dynamic, not some sort of like annual retreat or occasional Starbucks gift card or fill in the blank, right? Development is a proactive relationship with whoever is supervising you. And if it doesn't begin and end there, then it's probably not happening.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it is it's an always on thing, and it should be in the one-on-ones, maybe in those weekly one-on-ones that you're having, or
Exactly.
however that's
Could
happening.
be
It should always
quarterly,
be growth.
could be
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
it is. And, and this goes back to another, to me, a great example of this is the performance improvement plan.
Yeah.
The performance improvement plan has been relegated to a final step before firing somebody to cover your ass. A performance improvement plan should be a reoccurring part of everybody's work, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm always on a performance improvement plan. Now, hopefully it's not a step before Mark fires me, but it's there are
Fingers
things,
crossed.
yeah, there are things I need to do to improve. I mean, I think one of the hallmarks of our culture that isn't there yet, but I'd like to be over time, is everybody's always on a performance improvement plan.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that feeds into the growth mindset, right? That
Yeah.
I hear so much about, like, do you have a growth mindset or is it a fixed mindset? If you're always in this growth mindset, then you should be looking to improve. I know that I crave that for myself. Just, I don't ever want to be stagnant. It feels so boring.
And that is so important for marketing, branding, technology work, where the industry changes faster than the best practices can be developed. And you have to have a growth mindset if you're going to be in marketing.
And you have to have a culture that is developing people, because that is a culture who allows people to fail, to take risks, to give critical feedback, to say things that the boss might not want to hear. But if your culture is one marked by development, marked by proactive feedback, marked by risk and failure appropriately, then you have people who are giving you their best and saying the things that you need to hear. Because let's face it, in most large organizations, the higher up the totem pole you go, the more self-deluded you are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're not hearing what's in the front lines at all.
Yeah.
I'm going to marinate on that one for quite a bit, actually. Well, because I think about that, like I'm obsessive about that. And I love the idea of failing fast, failing forward, and then learning from those failures, because I also think, especially from a marketing perspective, that's how you get those think big marketing campaigns, right? Like, you're opening people to creativity if they're able to, in the safe space, fail without like these. I'm always telling my team as well too, like it's put it out there, start. Like, we can sit here and obsess over how to do all of these things right, but if it's not out there in the wild, we don't really know. And I have a very limited perspective, right? If I'm in a meeting with 5 people, we have a 5-person perspective on like one thing. But man, if you put it out there in the public.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be cut and paste. Cut and paste works in some cases, but listen, the way that these things play out at Netflix, to Mark's earlier example, are very different than how they play out at Southwest. Known for love, known for their stock symbol is LUV, right? I mean, Southwest will be a very different experience of risk and failure, of critical feedback, of hiring and on-ramping than Netflix, who will be different than Starbucks, who will be different than Historic Agency, who will be different than the challenge is that too often we just accept baseline health as enough instead of doing the work of aligning these types of cultural attributes to our brand, to our unique brand value. That's what employee branding is, looking at your unique brand value and promise and mission, and then contextualizing it to your employees.
You mean it's not just swag?
Please don't say that.
Or vinyl words on the wall.
Like, literally,
Just
like,
a nerve.
every client is like, "Oh, we don't need employee branding, because even though our churn rate is like 120%, we have these really cool T-shirts that we give."
Yeah, the T-shirts really sell it. People come on board for the T-shirts.
Yeah. Or backpack is photographed in your background there.
Well, I know I have so much swag, but in fairness, I'm the one that's in charge of swag.
There's so much art and science around brand strategy for the consumer, for the customer, for the new member, for the new donor, for the fill in the blank, right? We take at best 5% of that thinking and creativity and apply it to our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how you use, and I'll use this as an example because it's grand, influencers and creatives for our customers, but how do we use them for our employees? And so for historic, every time we get together, we call staff camp and we make really cool patches if we're talking about swag. But we get a maker to come in and teach our team something and to experiment and to learn how to roast coffee or learn what distilling bourbon looks like, or what letterpress, how do you do a letterpress, how do you design for letterpress, those types of things. And so there's definitely opportunities to go beyond the swag, if you will, and to create these experiences where people can say, yeah, I want to be part of that.
Yeah, the experiences are definitely key. It does take it to another level. And while I love swag, I am also just kidding. It is, but I
Yeah.
do think that it's much like people think that branding is just the logo.
Right.
You know what I
Exactly.
mean? It's a very
Yeah.
shallow way of looking at brand and culture of like, oh, it's the logo, it's the swag. No, it's
Yeah.
actually like 15 layers deeper than that, and
Yeah.
even more beyond that if you're really truly trying to like unpack it and do it well.
Well, the irony of fantastic marketing in today's fast-paced world is it will help brands that aren't aligned fail faster. You
Mm-hmm.
get the wrong influencer because you wrote the check. You get the wrong marketing strategy. You advertise through the wrong channels and you don't deliver on that in your product, service, or culture. At some point, that brand gap kills you.
Yeah. You have to be authentic. And I feel like we use that word so much, but it's so true.
Yeah.
It's this, it's this falseness in what the intention is.
Mm-hmm.
People can feel that. And I don't know if that's something that's evolved, or maybe we're just talking about it even more so now, more than ever. But like authenticity matters. It's definitely something that we preach at Grin as well too, with brands. Like, take the time. We're always pushing for them to take the time to find the creator that is going to be an authentic brand storyteller, right?
Yeah.
Because that is where the ROI is. It's not in, I'm not going to name an influencer, but like influencer A, because I have no idea. I don't want to get shot in the foot for something like that. But it's not just the influencer A that has like 1 million followers, said my name. But if they were stopped on the street and they couldn't tell me anything about it, like it's so inauthentic. And I think that people smell that even
Totally.
across their screen.
Yeah, you blow up their DMs or comments and they can't respond because they don't care. They're just taking a paycheck, right? Then it's going to be pretty quick. People notice that.
Absolutely.
And that's why even for us, authenticity is vulnerability too, right? It's going to this step where, okay, what does authenticity and vulnerability in design look like, or strategy look like? How can we invite the customer into our process and be vulnerable and be authentic with them, instead of creating this weird kind of hyped up, we're experts in this thing and you can't talk or give us input on this because we know what we're doing. And that we've seen that actually drastically change too. So wherever you can stick that authenticity, like for us in the creative process with our clients, it's meant higher ROI. But if you're a product company, what does that look like in your product and your support? What is it if you're a retail company? What does it look like for retail in that experience? But authenticity matters so much.
And if you're a company that is seeking growth in any capacity, then you have to figure out healthy process, because you'll have occasional rock stars in the creative space. It's obvious they're just creatively brilliant. In the sales space, you have that sales rock star. You've got the digital marketing rock star. There are rock stars in every vertical and niche, but you can't scale on a rock star. I mean, you can scale as far as that one rock star takes you until they quit, OD, drive off a cliff, who knows, right? But at some point, the idea that banking growth on a rock star never works. And if you do that, we work with cultures that have doubled down on a rock star, and they're the most toxic cultures you can imagine, because they've allowed a brilliant jerk to undermine the 99%. So the irony is that the healthier the culture, the more the process, and the more that you're no longer dependent on a single creative genius.
Yeah. And you also, You can't scale on one person.
No.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have to create that repeatable process in order to truly grow as a brand, as a company, as a culture to be able to do that. I could literally talk to you guys for hours, seriously. And maybe we'll do a book club podcast afterwards. And I'd love a copy of your second book beforehand. I'll provide feedback in an
Okay.
authentic manner.
Please. Yes. We would love that.
I do have a final
Authentic
question
welcome.
for you.
Yeah.
It is prediction time. What do you see changing in marketing over the next year?
Well, I think the biggest thing changing, and I don't, maybe 1 year is too soon for this, but I do see video becoming more of like Google using video more on first page results, and that the no search or no click search results where people are discovering your brand and seeing content and your lack of being able to attribute where they're seeing it is going to increase, right? And so all those marketers out there, if you don't know how to edit a video, you better start, because that's going to be the future, and platforms like Grin make it easy to partner with people. So
absolutely. I have a follow-up question to your prediction. Do you think, is it more specific to short form, or is it all video? Mm-hmm. Like short form, long form, all video?
Short form video. I mean, what you're seeing right now in search results from Google is vertical short form video. So mobile type style. But I think all forms, from an SEO standpoint, all forms of video are going to become a bigger and bigger part of SEO, but specifically short form vertical video is going to be key, because I think that's what Google is going to end up putting on first page results. This is a prediction. I have no inside information other than the contracts that Google is signing and the acquisitions that Google has. Yeah.
My really short answer to this is simply brand citizenship and social corporate responsibility is going to become more and more and more of a tool in marketing, and not simply a nice idea for those who care. The generational shifts are requiring organizations to take that more seriously than ever. So we're going to have to figure out how to tell that story in a way that promotes our brand and our marketing strategy better than we have.
And I would actually push further and say it's not just a tool. I think it needs to be part of the business model, because I think Generation Z is going to demand that businesses take political stances when they don't want to.
So I'm loving these predictions. This is fantastic. And Ted, you weren't even going to give a prediction.
Yeah, sorry. I know.
You slipped one in there. I appreciate it. I love it. I
did it quick.
Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on here and just sharing your insights on culture and how that's connected to, marketing strategy, and honestly, everything in between. Like I said, obsessed with both of you now, in a healthy way. Okay. I promise.
Thank you for having us. Super fun.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you.